After World War II, West Oakland was a diverse working-class neighborhood. There were African American migrants, a small Asian population, and an established white community. The port and the railroad were the two main employers. 7th Street was the heart of West Oakland. It was lined with shops, restaurants, churches, and a movie theater. It was a vibrant area, but the residential blocks lacked infrastructure and were crowded with wartime migrants. Many of the Victorian-era homes were starting to become run down. During this time, many city, state, and federal agencies tried to revitalize low-income neighborhoods. These agencies had the power of eminent domain, the ability to seize and tear down private property to make way for new development. In the redevelopment process, whole city blocks were cleared and residents lost their homes.
In the late 50s on to the 60s, when redevelopment came into a community, it was called Negro removal, because that's what it was. The city was able, through the federal government, to eminent domain to move people out, tear down that house and build something else. And most of those communities were people of color.
In West Oakland, buildings were demolished and residents evicted along 7th Street to make way for elevated BART tracks. Sculptor Bruce Beasley has lived in West Oakland since 1962.
Fortunately, I was here to see the 7th Street when it was an active street, and that was before BART. BART just killed 7th Street.
During the same period, Caltrans cleared land for 2 interstate highways, cutting the neighborhood off from the rest of the city and dividing it in half. The Housing Authority took land to build new projects, and using tanks, the federal government demolished 6 square blocks to make way for a large post office complex. Residents were promised jobs there, but instead the land lay vacant for almost a decade before the postal facility was even built.
What I saw was that eminent domain was absolutely a killer for people on the bottom. So I saw people who had come here in the 40s, been shipyard workers, bought homes, and they were turned into renters. And I thought that was just outrageous.
When these projects were first proposed, there wasn't a lot of organized community opposition, and redevelopment agencies weren't required to get public input.
It's hard to believe now how passive people were in the early 60s, even mid-60s. It was very hard to generate opposition to things that the government did.
But by the mid-1960s, that started to change. The Black Panther movement began in West Oakland at this time. The Panthers and others worked to change conditions in the neighborhood. Some of the first successful community organizing wasn't in opposition to large infrastructure projects like BART and the highway, but smaller, everyday issues like the lack of streetlights.
Physically, there were no streetlights in West Oakland. I don't mean there were old dim ones. There were none and never had been.
Neighborhood activists did research and discovered that more than a decade earlier, the public utility had agreed to install streetlights if the city would simply pay the electricity bill.
Wow, that sounded pretty good to me. But I realized that the city knew that, and they just didn't want to pay the bill for black part of town.
Residents confronted city officials with this information.
We had streetlights in 6 weeks. Well, those kind of things started galvanizing people.
In 1968, state law changed to require redevelopment agencies to create resident advisory councils before they used eminent domain. Suddenly, communities had a voice in the redevelopment process. Although the law now requires redevelopment agencies to work with neighborhood residents, it hasn't been an easy relationship.
The community didn't have any real resources, no real tools, no real advocacy, no real organizing. Once again, they didn't have the funding, they didn't have the technical assistance. There was not, and there's still today not a lot of that.
Today, West Oakland residents continue to organize to make redevelopment work better, and they've all but eliminated the use of eminent domain. Committed neighborhood activists like Margaret Gordon and Bruce Beasley now participate in the West Oakland Project Area Committee, or WOPAC, a coalition of residents that oversees how redevelopment funds are spent. WOPAC has invested in community-led projects like Mandela Foods Cooperative. It's a new grocery store across the street from BART that's part of a mixed-use development. The idea is to bring healthy food to the neighborhood.
It's basically a sight for sore eyes for a lot of people because there haven't been decent food choices here in so long.
Redevelopment and other government agencies often bring in ideas and projects from the outside. But what's different about this is that the redevelopment agency has invested in a business by and for local residents.
By this store finally being open here, it's obvious that West Oakland is changing, and it's changing for the better.
While the legacy of eminent domain abuses and paternalistic and discriminatory government policies will always be a part of West Oakland's history, projects like Mandela Foods give reason for hope. When redevelopment agencies invest in community leadership and local businesses, they have the potential to make meaningful, positive changes. For Planning for Healthy Places, I'm Robert Ogilvie. For other podcasts in this series and more information on redevelopment and public health, visit www.healthyplanning.org.